Do you like self-sufficiency and hand-to-hand combat? Perhaps you take pride in helping others and being the necessary extension of any party. Maybe you want to be able to withstand a pack of mobs and take them down effectively. Assist is a job of many possibilities, and if that intrigues you, then you have come to the right place. Hey, what is up guys, it's Emenalus, and welcome back to another video. Due to a popular request from you guys on my guide for mercenaries, I'll be covering assists as the topic of today's class guide. Coincidentally, assists are one of my longtime favorites along with mercenaries as well due to their unmatched versatility and how fun they're to play with, so I'm looking especially forward to working on this. I hope that today's video will be able to convey some of that enthusiasm as well, so there would be something for you to look forward to when creating an assist into your character roster. Just like before, I won't be as adamant about telling you how to build your character as most of our guides do, because that information is subjective and superficial in the long run. Certain stat builds might work with certain plays and gear, but we are all different and have varying budgets, offering infinite possibilities. So I'll be telling you about the different approaches available and how they work in practice, and I'll leave the joy of creating your own character up to you. It's a lot more fun than following a step-to-step guide anyway, but with that out of the way, let's put on our giraffe hats and get right into it. Assist is a job that utilizes knuckles and sticks as their choice of weaponry. Knuckles are typically used for physical attacks and can be worn along with a shield for increased durability. Sticks on the other hand are an essential tool for casting most assist spells such as shields and buffs. The strength of assists comes with their unmatched versatility, as they're practically useful for anything when built correctly for their intended purpose. For example, assists can become strong competents in both 1v1 and AoE, and thanks to their ability to stun foes, they can also reduce the amount of damage that a player on the receiving end takes, including themselves. Alternatively, an assist can specialize in providing buffs and healing for everyone, potentially making a huge difference when grinding or running group content such as giants and dungeons. In fact, in some cases full support assist, or FS in short, is a must-have. Please don't confuse with FFS. Assists can specialize to become Billposters, advanced martial artists who take their skill in hand-to-hand combat a step further and maximize their physical prowess with knuckles, or Ringmasters, devoted supports who with their expanded selection of powerful spells and heals, make them an irreplaceable asset of any partner or group, truly befitting the title of an angel. I'll be going over these two classes briefly near the end of the video, if you're interested in learning more about them. Assist roster skills mostly consist of various different buffs that you can learn, along with some utility spells at the top and combat skills at the bottom. Some of the skills that you can learn are quite useful, but quite build specific, and I'll be going over those in their respective build sections. In general, buffs will be useful across all playstyles though, so I'll be going over what each buff does. Patience increases your max HP by a percentage. Quick Step increases your movement speed. Haste increases your attack and casting speed. Cat's Reflex increases your block rate. Cannonball increases your dexterity. Mental Sign increases your intellect. Keep Up increases your stamina. Beef Up increases your strength. And Accuracy increases your hit rate. Another universally useful skill is Resurrection, which is used to resurrect a dead player. This both allows them to revive on the spot and reduce the amount of EXP lost based on the skill's level, making it handy for just about any assist. Considering assist's wide range of playstyles, it's important to mind that while assists are versatile, you can't really be the best at everything. Each stat serves a purpose for them, but each stat will be more or less viable depending on how you want to play yours, so keep that in mind when assigning points. Strength increases your physical damage. This means that normal attacks and strength-based skills will do more damage, but any spell scaling on intellect will not benefit from this stat. Stamina is a defensive stat that increases your HP, FP and defense, making you able to withstand more hits. As we all know, a bulky giraffe is a good giraffe. Dexterity is a versatile stat that will increase many of your offensive stats such as attack speed, hit rate and critical chance, as well as some defensive stats, block and parry. Mind you that the offensive stats won't really be of any use to you unless you intend to make use of normal attacks in combat. After all, skills are not affected by any of these. Intellect is a utility stat that increases the strength of your magical spells and MP. For assist specifically, Intellect increases the duration of buffs and also amplifies their effect thanks to the Intellect scaling bonus, giving them a boost with every 25 added points of Intellect specified under each buff. There are also some spells that scale on Intellect, even for Billposters. You can see what skills scale on from their tooltips by hovering over them, and it's something you should take into consideration while building your character. Not to worry though, you also get a chance to rearrange your stat points once you switch jobs if you end up having a change of heart. Either way, every step for assist carries some sort of a purpose and needs to be weighed carefully when making decisions. Do you want to make an assist that fights monsters one by one? Maybe a support that provides heals and buffs to other players? There's a basic stat build and gear set for every occasion, and how much you want of everything depends heavily on one's personal preference and gearing. Something that works for someone might not work as well for somebody else, making definitive builds hard to make. So with that in mind, let's look over what different kinds of playstyles there are for an assist, and what stats and skills you should emphasize should you set your eyes on one of them. Let's start this off by pulling something simple out of the hat, the 1v1 approach. 1v1, as the name might suggest, emphasizes the idea taking down enemies one by one. Don't let the simplicity fool you though, as making a capable 1v1 requires a bunch of different stats in order to work properly. I've gone over the basic 1v1 principles on my mercenary guide before, but I'll go over those again in case you haven't seen that one yet. When making a 1v1 character, it's important to find a good balance between damage, attack speed, and hit rate. While high damage output might initially sound inviting, missing most of your attacks won't do your damage much justice, and swinging your armor like a sloth doesn't give anything else but a sluggish experience of your character. Personally, I'd prioritize getting hit rate and attack speed up first if possible, and worry about the damage later. My own sweet spot for a 1v1 character is 40% hit rate and 70% attack speed or above, but that can vary from player to player. Dexterity, as I mentioned, increases both of his stats along with crit chance, but the stat isn't really all that good for increasing your hit rate. However, as you level up and unlock new weapons and armor sets, getting 40% hit rate is quite easy and not that hard to achieve. Another benefit is that you happen to be playing an assist, so as soon as you can learn accuracy at level 30, you can basically get yourself a free 20% or higher bonus to hit rate, if you don't mind prioritizing the buff over everything else first. Considering all of these factors, no doubt the stat build of a 1v1 assist heavily weighs on a good mix of strength and dexterity. Strength is needed for that much desired damage, and dexterity is good for filling in the gaps with attack speed, hit rate, and crit chance. Adding some stamina is also viable if you feel like you're dying too easily, but not too much of it. 20 or so should be enough in most cases, and if it's not, consider facing some easier monsters. While intellect can make your buff stronger, unfortunately small amplifications to buff strength isn't nearly as important as the damage you're dealing, and you're better off using those precious stat points on strength or dexterity instead. As for buffs and skills, the most important buffs to consider as a 1v1 assist are accuracy, haste, beef up, and cannonball. Accuracy for hit rate as mentioned before, haste for attack speed, beef up for strength, and cannonball for dexterity. On the topic of combat skills, most of them will be practically useless to you as you'll find landing a few basic attacks a lot better than casting a single skill. Burst Crack is an option though, if you like to have area damage available. The skill you should be setting your eyes on as a 1v1 though is Stone Hand, the second skill in the row. This skill will give you a short buff that has a chance to stun your opponent with each hit, rendering your opponent unable to do anything for 3 seconds. Best case scenario is that a monster will not even get a chance to hit you before it ends up dead, and is actually quite likely with Stone Hand maxed out. Giraffes are immune to stuns though, so I want to keep your hopes up with defeating one. I'm watching you. Jokes aside though, that's pretty much everything that you need to know about the 1v1 assist. Simple on the surface and complex in theory, 1v1 assists can be a difficult thing to balance, but when done correctly, they equal a heavenly experience. Combined with high damage, capability to buff oneself, and stun to keep enemies at bay, they are the very definition of a one-man army, and a pleasant experience for anyone that likes to play solo or be independent. And on top of that, they're incredibly cool. Strong second to giraffes though. Another viable approach for an assist focusing on combat is of course the AoE playstyle. Is one monster not enough for you and feel the need to be surrounded by them in order to be satisfied? Can't say I don't get you, I feel that way all the time. Must be the apex predator instincts. AoE assists take advantage of their high durability to pull multiple monsters with them while absorbing their hits and taking them down swiftly with area attacks. The area attack in question for assists is Burst Crack, the first skill that you can find in the combat skill section. This skill can be used starting from level 28, which is the earliest area attack across all jobs that becomes available. Burst Crack is an incredibly strong skill due to its scaling and casting speed, and AoE assists are capable of easily taking mobs down in a matter of seconds. However, they tend to be quite squishy early on when compared to mercenaries. So despite the added damage, they need to be careful to not overdo it and pull too many. Luckily, there are a couple other skills that can help an AoE assist with surviving an onslaught. Stone Hand, as mentioned before on the 1v1 section, can also be used with Burst Crack and as a tool to mitigate damage from enemies, as more stun mobs naturally means less damage you'll have to take. So as long as you can survive the initial impact so to speak, the rest of the group should be easier to take care of. Another insurance to your survival is a skill called Prevention, which you should find at the end of your utility section. Prevention is an auto-heal spell that heals you for a certain amount once you hit 10% HP or below, potentially healing you all the way to full when maxed out. The reason why I only suggest this for AoEs is because the auto heal will work only if you survive after taking a hit that takes you to below 10%, so prevention isn't likely to save a squishy character. Just be aware of that if you want to teach it to something else. But for tanks, the spell is basically a second health bar, and is a must-have for anyone who doesn't want to experience an oopsie alternative to pissing your pants. And that oopsie ain't pleasantly warm either. After getting your skills sorted out, the next important thing is how you're going to be building your character. An AoE Assist is most likely going to try with some strength and a lot of stamina, all of course depending on how big packs you want to pull and how quickly you want to take down monsters. The gear you're wearing also should be taken into account, although no real tank sets become available until after level 60. So until then, you're probably just running scrap gear. Be sure to get enough stamina and update your armor pieces whenever you can. And if possible, try to get your hands on a rare quality shield. They tend to be much stronger than usual shields and can help a lot with tanking. Especially with an assist, every point of defense counts. Like always, I recommend checking flyffipedia.com for available gear pieces that you could use later on. Who knows? Maybe someone will sell exactly what you need for a relatively cheap price. Talking about defense, on top of your skills, some essential buffs for an AoE assist would be Heap Up, Patience, Haste, Cat's Reflex, and Beef Up. Like I covered earlier, Heap Up, Patience, and Cat's Reflex can give you an edge with staying alive, while Haste and Beef Up can help you take down mobs quicker. More casting speed means faster burst cracks, and Beef Up more damage. An important thing to note is that using burst crack, or any skills in general, doesn't take hit rate, attack speed, or crit chance into account, and therefore buffs like accuracy and cannonball don't hold as much value as they do for 1v1. Whatever you consider to be more important to max out first, however, is up to you. Making an AoE character is a fairly simple thing in theory, but mechanics-wise an AoE character is much harder to learn and master. On top of simply eating food whenever you get hurt, you need to also manage your FP levels with vital drinks, and just regular food isn't going to be enough later on. You will need to buy yourself pills, long cooldown restoratives that can save your life in a pinch, and learn to use them at the right time is a skill of its own. And like I mentioned before, you need to be mindful of how many monsters you're pulling, as a little bit too many can lead to a situation beyond saving. Finding the right balance can be an experience of trial and error, but once you learn the basics and get the hang of things, AoE can be a pleasant experience and an effective way to farm and level up quickly. Don't be discouraged if things don't go smoothly at first, take one step at a time and be ready to face some challenges that may come your way. It'll pay itself off in time, just like growing your neck. If the AoE playstyle caught your interest, you should know that continuing with AoE is viable with both Billposters and Ringmasters past level 60, although with different approaches. I'll be going over the details with both classes in the respective preview sections at the end, so be sure to check those out if you want to consider your options. AoE with assists isn't only limited to strength and knuckles. The last primary playstyle to assist would be the one known as a full support or a buff slave, and that's the support assist. As the name suggests, these assists dedicate their everything in order to be useful to everybody else, while relying on their help to progress. Support assists can come in many shapes or forms, especially early on when there aren't that many skill points to spend, and you can't really be equally useful for every type of a character or player. So an important consideration when making a support assist is what you will be using the character for. Are you playing with friends whose jobs you already know beforehand? Perhaps you want to just stick with tank players? Or perhaps you don't really know and you'll just go with whatever comes your way. Job hunting is a pain, a game or not, and matching everyone's needs can be quite hard. Whichever the case is, adapting to your situation is important, and some common knowledge can go a long way. So here's a few suggestions that should work for most occasions. Haste is a skill that virtually every player will find pleasant to have. 1v1 will benefit from faster attacks, while AoE and casters get to cast their spells faster, making it an universally useful buff. And on top of that, it will also make your buffing and healing faster. It's the one thing you can go wrong with. Keep Up and Patience will be of use to just about anyone, but especially tanks will love you if you have these buffs well maintained. For the rest, they probably amount to a nice little extra, but who knows. Maybe someone's life will be saved thanks to these sometime. Quickstep is not as enhancing as it is convenient, but it will at least be usable by everyone. Speed has a strong impact on quality of life, and can make a leveling experience just a little more tolerable when it don't take a minute to run between monsters. Accuracy is a skill that every 1v1 would consider a must-have. Hit rate makes all the difference, especially with the spell maxed out, and can make the experience for both of you much more pleasant. Mental Sign is good to learn for yourself and maybe some other intellect users, as it allows your buffs and heals to become more powerful. While it doesn't bring anything new to the table, it can bring the most out of the important spells. Feel free to remind yourself of what each buff does in the skills section in case you want to specialize to serve a special type of a player. I'm sure there are plenty of players around for someone to fit your array of buffs. But remember that the most important thing to any support player is just simply being a good sport. Being nice, proactive and helpful will go a long way, and maybe even lead to having lasting companions in the future as well. After all, you will grow as your companions do, and you might be able to provide them things they need as you level up. And I mean, who can say no to a pleasant time together? Nobody can ever say no to a giraffe anyway. Build-wise, support assists are best off building as much intellect as possible. Like mentioned before, intellect basically helps you with everything that a support assist does, including buff, intellect scaling, duration, healing power, and maximum MP. Support assists can get a little bit too squishy later on though, and some might prefer to opt in for some stamina for added durability, but if you can help it, do try to rely on your buffs, fight or flight response, and other forms of protection as much as you can. After all, each unused intellect point takes away from your potential. There are some good sets and sticks that can give a considerable boost to your intellect, casting speed, and healing effect as you level up, so feel free to check out from Flyffpedia.com what options there are for you. For starters though, the go-to support set is the Wedge of Flurry set at level 45. It might be a little hard to afford on level though, so do try saving for it or asking your friends for help with affording it. You won't be making much money on your own as a support assist anyway. That is, unless you decide to take a less codependent route. Back in the old days, support assists didn't have much choice over whenever they wanted to level. They were entirely dependent on whenever another player was active, and if nobody happened to be available at the time, that meant you wouldn't be making any progress either. To combat that indisputable codependency, and perhaps the fact that people have become more driven towards just making support assists on their own, a spell called Moonbeam was added in Flyff Universe, sitting just above the utility skills in the assist skill tree. This skill allows you to apply a damaging effect on an enemy, with its damage and duration scale on your intellect. Essentially, this allows support assists to also do things on their own if they're not so lucky with finding partners, or if for some reason they want to take a different approach from a generic 1v1 assist. Of course, this also means that you have to put some points aside for Moonbeam separately and have less available for buffs and heals, but that is your choice to make. If you want to optimize the usage of Moonbeam, having Mental Sign and Haste possibly maxed out is a good thing to have. Mental Sign for damage and Haste for casting and attack speed. And if you do end up taking a liking for handling things on your own, there certainly is a potential alternative from being a buff slave as you advance to your second job. Ringmasters are an advanced job class which gains access to a bunch of new powerful buffs and group spells, making them the ideal job for support players to advance to. Some of these spells include the ability to increase one's defensive and offensive capabilities greatly, casting massive group heals, and removing debuffs from a player. However, on top of being helpful to others, Ringmasters are fully capable of also taking care of themselves if built with that in mind. They can learn a new AoE spell called Merkaba Hansel Rusha, creative name design right there, that leaves a damaging area resembling a cross on the ground that deals damage scaling on intellect. Thanks to this and their great stamina scaling, Ringmasters are also capable of specializing for AoE, which is surprisingly sustainable thanks to them being able to heal themselves while waiting for enemies to die to their damaging effect. So whether you consider making an AoE character or continue playing as support, both options are very viable. Just remember, your buffs won't be as strong if you sacrifice some of your intellect for stamina. Either way, definitely a job with lots of potential. An alternative path that you can take with Assist is becoming a Billposter, an advanced job class that can learn expert combat techniques when using a knuckle. They can also learn a buff that passively increases the damage that their knuckle does right after advancing. The weird thing about Billposters is that some of their skills actually want to make use of intellect, which isn't a good combat stat in general, so most of them can be quite conflicting. But if you know any better by now, a good 1v1 won't want to use skills anyway. One skill that stands above the rest though is the legendary Azure, or shortly referred to as Assel. It's a skill that deals massive amounts of damage in a single blow, scaling on your strength and MP spent. It is a heavily utilized skill in PvP, as it prevents an opponent from having a chance to heal, but of course, this depends a lot on how well equipped both the Billposter and the opponent is. And just so you know, PvP is heavily pay-to-win. Another twist to Billposters is the fact that the new AoE spell that they learn at level 70 uses intellect. This tends to split players between whether they want to stick to a strength build and keep using Burst Crack for some 1v1 potential, or switch for an intellect build at level 60 and make better use of their buffs, along with their new AoE. Billposter is a job that in certain aspects can be quite complex and hard to balance depending on how you want to play it. Regardless though, it's a really fun job to play and a strong favorite of many, and something you should definitely go for if you like playing Assist the offensive style. Giraffe certified satisfaction. My god. I did expect the assist guide to be longer than the last, but I didn't expect this much content. Regardless though, I hope that you got an answer for everything that you wanted to know and that the video helped you. If that's the case, do consider dropping a like and subscribing if you want to see more content like this, and maybe even sharing with your friends who could also use the guide. And of course, feel free to drop a comment if you were left with any more questions, or if you have any suggestions for what you'd like to see next. For example, if you want to see the Acrobat or Magician guide next, cast your opinions, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. If you want to be in better touch with me, feel free to check the description below for my Discord community server, where I'll be answering questions and holding conversations regularly, or check out my Twitter where I'm posting frequently about my daily life, where I'm going and what I'm doing. I'm also intending on getting back to streaming soon when the parts for my new PC arrive and everything is set up, so if you want to see me playing Flyff live and maybe something else too, you can find the link to my Twitch as well. Do also look forward to more varied YouTube content once everything is set, with some more insufferable eam-tastic humor coming your way. Either way, thank you so much for your time watching the video, hope you enjoyed it, and that I'll be seeing you on the next one whenever I'm uploading more trash. But until then, it's bye bye.